The Baldwin County Public School System, considered one of the finest educational environments in the entire state of Alabama, has a history beginning in the latter part of the 18th century, when, as records indicate, Alabama's first public schoolhouse was built in the North Baldwin County community of Tensas in 1799. At that time, nearly 10 years prior to Baldwin being organized as a county, the area remained geographically expanse. Agriculture served as king, and family farms dotted every section of the county. However, in this era of extremely limited highway systems, individual communities built their own respective public schoolhouses, with the Board of Education supplying teachers to provide instruction. In the early part of the 20th century, the Baldwin County Public School System boasted over 80 separate school districts, each with their own individual public schoolhouse. As time progressed, marked with improvements in transportation and engineering, numerous school districts were consolidated into nearby areas, leaving us today with very few of the original public schoolhouses, which distinguished, beginning in 1799, Baldwin County as the birthplace of Alabama's first public schoolhouse. This documentary, commissioned by the Honorable County Commissioners of Baldwin County and honorable members of the Baldwin County Board of Education, seeks to illuminate these few remaining and historic original public schoolhouses in an effort to pay tribute to one of the finest public school systems in Alabama. On September 21st, 1906, residents of the Daphne community conducted a meeting on the grounds of the former building which housed the Baldwin County Courthouse, overlooking Mobile Bay from the city of Daphne. It was only 5 years prior that this exceptionally beautiful building, imbuing all the graces of Southern charm as demonstrated by its architecture, was deactivated as the county courthouse upon the relocation of the county seat in 1901 to the city of Bay Minette. Wondering what to do with this magnificent structure, Daphne citizens at this meeting decided that the establishment of a state normal school, a state training facility for teachers of the era, would be of tremendous benefit not only to Baldwin County, but to the continued progress of providing well-trained teachers for service throughout Alabama. The first courses offered at the Daphne State Normal School were mathematics, English, Latin, expression, and art, with teacher training expenses for the 9-month training period remaining $90 for room and board, $9 for incidentals, $9 for laundry, and $7.50 for textbooks. During one teacher's education at the facility, her nostalgia reflected memories of being included the honor of ringing the school bell to call students to their classes.
Daphne Normal School was created by the State Department of Education in partial compensation to the people of Daphne for the loss of the courthouse. 1901, 1902 brought drastic changes to the structure of county government and state government too. The new state constitution was adopted in those years, and at that particular time, the site of the courthouse was authorized to be in Bay Minette, it being more the center of the county, geographical center of the county, than the Daphne courthouse earlier. The Daphne courthouse was a beautiful structure, and it was a two-story structure, beautiful white columns in front, and a huge courtroom that served so well later as an auditorium. It was just left standing empty. And as compensation to the people of that area, the state legislature gave them a 2-year teacher training institution. And it lasted from about 6 or 7, when it was actually got in operation, until 1940. And it died for lack of funding. It was just never funded the way that the other teachers' colleges. A normal school, and of course, we students there called it Daphne abnormal. A normal school was defined as a school for giving teachers 2 years of education in that field. And at that point, you could get a Class D certificate. Now, if you wanted to improve that D certificate, you had to go to another teacher training institution, a state teachers college, not a state normal school. There were several other state normal schools, and there were also some state teachers colleges. And Daphne was a kind of a feeder school for Livingston State Teachers College, which has changed its name several times in recent years and is now the University of West Alabama. The Daphne Normal School had an enormous impact on the education in Baldwin County. Almost every teacher in the system went through that institution. I entered there in 1930, the school year of 37 and the school year that ended in 38. I did my 2 years there then. Came out with a D certificate. There were about 31 or 2 of us in the whole school at that time. It was in decline. But it had some marvelous teachers there. It had 4 teachers, one of whom was the school librarian, and 3 others. And one was the president of the college, and he taught. And the other 2 teachers taught the other subjects. The number of subjects was strictly limited. We had to beg for some mathematics to be taught there. But I consider that I got a very good education from those 4 people. I got the same benefits at the college level that I think my pupils in the small schools got. I got individual attention. For my college algebra and college trigonometry, I sat as one student at the feet of the president of the school. I sat in his office and outside his office. And I was free to walk in there anytime I wanted some help on a trig problem. He essentially handed me the book and said, do this and come see me whenever you need some help. And he gave me an examination every once in a while. And I figure that I got just as good an education there as I could have gotten in any school anywhere. Daphne's State Normal School was important to the school system for another reason, because it contained the demonstration school for the college, which was the Daphne Public School. There were all sorts of power struggles between the county superintendent of education and the president of the school over who was going to control that school. The president down there thought it ought to be his, and the superintendent of education in Baldwin County thought it ought to be his school. But they worked out some good compromises. The county agreed to pay the teachers, and he agreed to allow the president of the college to choose the teachers. All of that story is an interesting one in the present minutes of the Baldwin County Board of Education. There wasn't enough room in the main building for but one elementary class. I don't remember which it was, probably 2nd grade. The other grades were in the old jail building, which was on the grounds of the courthouse building. And the classes even spilled over into the local churches of the area. Daphne Elementary School was literally scattered all over town in those days. But every one of the classes were available to Daphne Normal students for demonstration teaching purposes. We were made to construct lesson plans, which were approved by the president of the college, little less. And then we were allowed to go and have a small group of children made available to us for teaching purposes. And that's how we learned to teach. There was a bell on a bell tower behind the present college, behind the old courthouse, and it was rung by hand once every hour by the janitor or someone designated by the president. It fell to my duty in the last year to be the bellman every hour. And from my vantage point there at the bell tower, I was close enough to see into one of those classrooms, into the old jail, and to hear every word that was spoken there. And I would conceal myself on every opportunity in a little niche in that bell tower and stand there and listen to what went on in Aubrey McVeigh's classroom. Aubrey McVeigh was later superintendent of education ahead of me. But I learned more from him about classroom techniques, standing in a niche under the bell tower and listening through the open window of the jail than I ever learned over in the main building. And I look back to that as a golden opportunity to learn from a master teacher. I remember that the technique that I remember most clearly was Aubrey McVeigh's use of maps in the teaching of history and geography. He somehow had acquired a marvelous collection of maps that were on rollers and mounted in front of his classroom. And he taught with a map down and a pointer at all times. And I learned along with his pupils, and learned the importance of that in my own later teaching. After Daphne Normal was closed, there was a sum of money that had been gathered down there in that community. I don't remember how much it was, but it was several thousands of dollars. And it was in Montgomery and earmarked for the use of Daphne Normal, but it was never spent there. And after the school had been closed, the state, rather in the same manner that they compensated the community for the loss of the courthouse, they compensated them for the loss of its successor, the normal school, by building them the most modern junior high school that Baldwin County had ever seen. That school was as far ahead in construction as this particular office I'm sitting in is ahead of the office that I occupied here with the Board of Education. It was a giant step forward.
In the late 1890s, students in the Daphne community were going to school in a building on Randall Avenue. And with the institution and the formation of the Daphne Normal School, the State Teachers College, in the building that had been the courthouse in Daphne, students were then allowed to go there as part of a model school that was used to instruct teachers. Now, the normal school itself was a school that was grades 1 through 12. And the senior high school and the junior high school were actually called the normal school, and the elementary school was called the model school. When students finished the senior high school, they could continue in what was called Normal 1 class and Normal 2 class, but students in the normal college, which was the state authorized teacher college for the area, would attend school they had come here from many other areas and would attend school there, and part of the curriculum would include student teaching in the model school. The faculty for the normal school taught high school classes as well as the teachers who were in training. And teacher training in Alabama was authorized by the State Department of Education, and a 2-year normal school would provide enough education for a teacher who had satisfactorily completed that course of study to be certified as a teacher in the state of Alabama. If a teacher chose to go on to a 4-year institution and earn a bachelor's degree, the normal school in Daphne was actually a feeder school for Livingston, but those courses today, just like a community college, would transfer to a 4-year university. The Daphne Normal School, or the State Teacher College on Mobile Bay in Daphne, Alabama, was especially associated with Livingston University in Livingston, Alabama. And upon the closing of the Daphne Normal Teachers College in Daphne, those records were transferred to Livingston University and are housed there today at the University of West Alabama in Livingston. Teacher training throughout the state was authorized at the beginning of the 20th century through the State Board of Education. And the college in Daphne was considered one of the highest in standards and in teachers. The reputation of teachers graduating with certification from Daphne Normal School have indeed proven to be some of the most outstanding educational leaders in the state, not only in Baldwin County, but in the state and nationally. Many of them did go on to state and national jobs. Upon the closing of Daphne Normal School and the building of Daphne Junior High, those same standards for teacher excellence were continued, and Daphne Junior High, built in 1939, was without a doubt the most modern of all school buildings in the state. The first one in Baldwin County with an intercom that was run by an electric clock from the office, and there were equipment and modern desks in schools, in the schoolrooms, that were unheard of up to that time in Baldwin County. So the excellence in education in Daphne is indeed one of those that's part of the rich heritage of Baldwin County.
And after that, a group of citizens, the Commissioner's Court was going to sell the property on the bay where the old courthouse was. Professor J.S. Lambert got with the Teachers Association of Baldwin County, and he issued a petition for the teachers to send out to try to save the property of the courthouse to become a state normal school. After that, he and a group of citizens from Daphne, Dr. Mason and Mr. Mix and L.C. Pomeroy, and a whole group of citizens went to see Governor Comer in Montgomery to try to get a state teaching school here in Daphne. Governor Comer was one of the governors who's known as the educational governor. With his help, they secured a subscription in July of 1907, and the governor gave him $2,500, but the people of Daphne were to raise some $10,000. So the ladies of Daphne, Mrs. L.C. Pomeroy, who was known for her pie socials, and there was several other ladies that are listed. They said that they were the backbones of bringing the old normal school to Daphne. Our first president was Mr. Lovett, but he only stayed for about 9 months, and then after that it was Mr. Baker from 1908 to about 1915, and that's when his lovely wife Bonnie started the Vassar chain, which was later turned into the Daphne May Day, which they had May Day celebrations, and the first May Day queen was Mrs. Goldsby of that year. Mrs. L.C. Pomeroy, Mr. McKenzie, and Mr. O'Neill, they all had boarding houses that the students could stay at. It was advertised as a beautiful place on the bay with beautiful trees. They had a horse track, racing track. They had tennis, the girls' athletic club, baseball, and any number of groups of activities there. There was 5 languages taught: math, chemistry, physics. It was known at one time as a Class A state school. Of course, it had its problems of always having to raise money. But Governor Comer was one who wanted to eradicate illiteracy in Alabama. At that time, 1 in 13 white people could not read or write. 1 in 4 blacks could not read and write. So it was an adventure in teaching students to become teachers. It was like a community college. You got a certificate. You went 2 years and you got a certificate where you could go and teach. Most of the teachers in Baldwin County received their teaching certificate from the Old Normal School. Some of the books, articles that you read in the Nymph talks about the school, and it was a very classical school in the sense that it had the Washington and Lee organizations. They had their domestic clubs there, and they had celebrations there. And at this time, people were coming across the bay by bay boats to Daphne and to come to the schools here. Students came as far away as Chicago, Illinois, Macon, Georgia, and it was building quite a reputation. But funds was the main thing that was always at the heart of the situation. We've never appropriated enough money for education of the people. And then the next president was Dr. Holmes. He was the 6th generation of family that lived here. At one time he was a state senator, and a lot of progress was done under his management. And then the last principal or president of the normal school was Dr. Murphy, and he was from 1924 to 1940. And a great deal was done under his administration. By that time, we got the causeway, and that changed a lot of transportation from coming across the bay. He was blonde, and he'd gone to school, and they were known as Minnie's little men, and they were plenty tough, I can tell you that. And so Mr. Noe was getting on to, Mr. Noe Waldrop was the principal at the Old Normal School at that time, and he was getting on to Little Sam about doing something, and he said, well, says, I'll take care of that, Sam, in the hereafter. And so when he said that, Little Sam bent over and he picked up his inkwell and he threw it at Mr. Noe Waldrop and he knocked him out. And of course that caused kind of a rufus in the classroom, so when Mr. Noe come to, he said, Sam, he said, why did you throw that and hit me? He said, because you told me you was going to take care of me in the hereafter.
Normal schools, such as the one in Daphne, could be found all over the Southeast. They were named normal schools because they set the standard or the norm for excellence. They were basically a school to teach teachers. First courses taught there included things like math and English, Latin, art, and many of the earliest teachers in Baldwin County received their education at the Daphne Normal School. The school was founded in July 1907 with a state legislative appropriation of $2,500. Student costs included room and board for 9 months, around $90. Textbooks were $7.50 for the same term. Even their laundry was accounted for, and it ran somewhere around $9. Service was discontinued at the school in September of 1940 after 33 years. And those records from the Daphne Normal School were then transferred to the Livingston State Teachers College, and those files were incorporated into the files of Livingston. And unfortunately, the building was eventually torn down in 1958, having at that time outlived its usefulness.
I grew up in Daphne, and during World War II, when I was a little girl, I remember that the normal school was still there, although it was not a school at that time. But families, different families, rented apartments in that building this was because Brooklyn Air Force Base in Mobile, Alabama had just been established by Frank Boyking, the congressman at the time. And the area just grew so quickly, there was not enough housing for them. So the families would live in the normal school at that time, because I would go in there and visit with friends, little girls and boys who lived there at the time. And then I also remember during the 40s and 50s when we had the Mayday courts at Daphne. Of course, I was in several of them, and the Mayday courts from all over Baldwin County would come and use the normal school to change from their everyday, the clothes that they wore, into the antebellum dresses to appear in the Mayday. So it was used for something on up through the 1960s.
I started school at the normal school. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Jewell. She was a jewel too. But the second year, I went to school in the jail, and the third year I went across the street to a house, and in the fourth and fifth grade I went to the Woodman of the World building, which was separated for 2 classrooms. And following that, in about 1939 is when the Daphne Junior High School was finished, and we went to the 6th grade there. So in the meantime, the teachers from the normal college would come up and teach us various subjects. I remember one class in particular was writing, and they made us make that loop and loop and loop to form the letters on the ball of your hand, and that was a little bit much at that time. The jail building was 2 stories. I guess the lower portion was really for serious confinement, and they climbed the stairs up to the 2nd story. And the 2nd story was a rather large room with an additional room in the south side, but I went to school in that room, I believe, in the 2nd grade. And we had a show and tell. And at that time, my people were raising rabbits. And I brought a little white rabbit to school to show and tell one day. And there was a man that I went to school with that time named Dickie Dreyer. And he was petting that rabbit, and all of a sudden his eyes lit up, and he picked it up, and that rabbit had urinated all over him. Anyway, he said that little rabbit did what it did on me, you know. So, but the normal school, if I may, when it opened in, I think, 1907, they had acquired this very large bell. It was cast iron, 42 inches in diameter. I think it weighs 1,300 pounds. Anyway, it was up on a bell tower and a water tank also. And a man named Tom Jones was the man who was custodian of the bell, and he rang the bell whenever the time to go to class, take recess, go to bed, whatever. Anyway, it was really, really a big thrill. If you ran up to Tom Jones at the proper time, he'd pull out his gold watch and he'd look at it, and he would tell you, okay, you can pull. And occasionally he'd let us kids pull the bell. But the bell was very important to the college in that it was set the tone for the schedule. And in 1940, when the college closed, the bell was still available, and it was moved up to the center of town across from what is Troun's store, which is now Guido's restaurant. And in an open lot there, it was placed on a tower. And it was used for the air raid warning in the blackout period in World War II. Most people don't realize it, but there was a serious threat in Mobile area mainly at the shipyards where the German submarines had come into the Gulf, and as the ships might even go out for a test run, they'd be attacked. So we were seriously concerned here, and they used the bell for the air raid warning or for the warning of the blackout, at which time you turned your lights out and went to a darkened part of the house if you were going to read or something about a different area. That bell was rung at the end of World War II. A man named Sergeant Smith, an elderly gentleman who has a story of his own, was mayor at the town. And he had the bell rung at the end of World War II, and it was very touching. It also rang at the end of World War I, and later it was moved back to the Mayday grounds, and the kids would ring the bell, and it was becoming a little bit of a nuisance, and that it was waking some of these old grumps on the bayfront, and so the bell was pushed over because it was becoming an annoyance, and it was laying on the ground. And then after that, it mysteriously disappeared and ended up in Loxley at a church. They were undecided as to what to do with the bell. It appeared to be too big for them to build a tower around or elevate or something. But anyway, they sold it to a church in Josephine, and they erected the bell in Josephine in front of the Baptist church. In 1901, when the courthouse was moved to Bay Minette, it left a very beautiful building vacant, and at that time they began to try to do something for Daphne to offset the great loss of the courthouse. And so they legislated a normal college to be housed in what was the courthouse. It was renovated slightly, not very much. A couple of columns in the front, and that's about the extent of it. And it became a boon to Daphne after the loss of the courthouse, with the residence of some highly qualified teachers, and of course students and other aspects of college town life. And it was great. And the students played basketball and baseball, and we had teams coming out of Mobile to compete with them. And it was added greatly to the social ability of Daphne in every respect. And so it helped Daphne over a bad hump, and it was in operation from 1907 to 1940. And many of the local people who would not have otherwise been able to go to college were able to go to college, and a great deal of the people who graduated from the college went on to be teachers and prominent citizens around the Mobile, Baldwin, Scambia area primarily. And so the college was very, very good for Daphne.
The Old Normal School had its humble beginnings as in where once was the courthouse, because Daphne was the county seat at one time from 1868 to about 1901. And they say that there was a kind of a battle between the Stapletons and Han. Han had purchased 3,000 acres of land in Bay Minette in that area from Kearney Mill Company. And they wanted to move the courthouse to Bay Minette because it would be more centrally located than where it was in Daphne. So there was quite a bit of battles that went on up to the Supreme Court, and Daphne wanted to hold on to the courthouse, and the legislature passed an act moving the courthouse to Bay Minette, but they made no provisions on how to do it. So Norton was a newspaper man in Daphne, and he proceeded to write articles, and well, people even had fist fights over the removal of the courthouse, and families were split for years about it. So in the heat of the night, when the sheriff was out of town, they say wagon loads of people from Bay Minette came. They said that they were scared of their own shadows there and shaking in their boots and had their pistols, and they went in and they raided the courthouse. They loaded up the wagons of their the tables and the chairs, and some of the people in Daphne were so indignant that Judge Hall even loaded his own stuff on the wagons. And they said as they left the courthouse in those wagons with those records and everything, that they were scared all the way that there was going to be a shootout as they were carrying the records on up to Bay Minette. And so after that, the people had to organize, and they got the normal school in Daphne. And they said that it was to train teachers, and it was also a grade school. And then they said that they not only had teaching of 5 languages and chemistry and everything, but they had hands-on history. They would take boat rides. At that time, you didn't have the causeway or the interstate, so they took boat rides, and they would take these boat rides on up to 27 Mile Bluff, where Mobile was settled in 1702, the first French capital in America. And then they would go on over to Blakely, which Blakely, up into 1821, was a city as big and large as Mobile, was settled by Josiah Blakely. Also, it was the last battle of the Civil War was fought there at Blakely. They would tour the old Spanish fort, which was built when we were under Spanish government in 1780. And then they had horse rides. They would take horse rides. And they had swimming contests. And they said that it was like a state fair when they had the May Day down there with all the politicians, the governors, and a young man by the name of Lister Hill came in 1924 campaigning against John R. Tyson, and he won that seat. And he and Senator Sparkman made it to May Day every election day. And we had governors and senators who came. And they had some of Daphne's finest chefs were cooking barbecue. They had baseball games and equestrian clubs and tennis bouts. And it was a very, very, in 1924 it was a Class A normal school.